It's only a game, so put up a real good fight. I'm gonna be snookering you tonight. I'm playing for my aim, so you better believe I'm right.
In the Pocket every Friday night at 7 on BBC One.
It's you two, Starsky and Crash.
Caught in the act.
Sorry, it doesn't cover this one, Phil. I have never been so humiliated. I look like Santa's bit on the side.
You and the Nigerian army, Henry. You and your mates must have come across these things.
Yes, we did. Often.
Well, what did you do?
Run.
But some actions
Sometimes I look at that old video of me and Mer's anniversary dinner, just to remind me of good times.
speak louder than words. Roger Roger, Thursday at 9:30 on BBC One.
On BBC One now, See Here goes Behind the News.
Hello, and Happy New Year. It seems a while since our last Behind the News.
Yep, I think we've got our work cut out this time. We've had 2 busy months of news to catch up on.
Yes, there's a lot to get through. Hi, Eva.
Hello, Eva. Happy New Year. I'll see you later.
OK, see you later. Do join me, but don't disappear with my coffee.
Don't worry, I don't like coffee, so you're all right. Now, we've had a 2-month break, so there's been plenty for you to look at in the news. Has there been anything that has really struck you?
Well, there's been this ongoing story about the woman who has had a baby. I think her name is Mrs. Buttle. At first, the papers said that she was 54 and that she'd had the baby naturally without any fertility treatment. They said it was a Guinness World Record of the second oldest woman to give birth. Then it was said that she wasn't 54, she'd lied, and she was actually 60. She was 61, in fact, last Tuesday. The natural birth wasn't a true story either. It turns out that she has had fertility treatment. Now, this woman already has a daughter of 35 who has 3 children of her own, the oldest of which is 19. So, of course, the new baby is then the uncle of the 19-year-old. On top of that, the 19-year-old has said that his grandmother was regularly accompanied by his mother to the fertility clinic, presumably in case of any problems. So it wasn't a natural pregnancy, and she's paid out £10,000 for the treatment. It also turns out that her partner then left her because of the media attention and went back to his wife. The story continued then, with a 19-year-old saying that his mother had donated her eggs to his grandmother, as she wasn't fertile at 61. So that means the baby is the uncle of the 19-year-old and his brother. Amazing.
What a story.
There's another story, quite sweet really, about 2 pigs. Well, it started out with 3 of them. They were due to be slaughtered, and 2 of them realised what was happening and escaped through a freezing river and disappeared. Everyone was really worried about them, and the newspapers had helicopters out searching for them. Then they offered to buy these pigs, worth about £50, for £15,000 to save their lives. So there was this mad search to find these pigs. After a week they found one, then the second one the next day. By now the owner had promised that they wouldn't be killed and could live out their lives on a farm, happily without being turned into roast pork.
It reminds me of the 3 Little Pigs story, except in this case, only 2 of them got away. What about you though, Eva? Were you on the lookout? Because it happened near where we live. Were you keeping an eye out for them?
No, I know some people were because they had heard them rooting about outside their houses, but being deaf I heard nothing, and my cat didn't let me know about any noises. But it's a cultural thing. We were all so worried, and the Americans and the French were laughing at us. They were filming us Brits getting excited about these pigs. Different culture, you see. It's like what's happening in the political world in the States with Clinton. There's all these stories of his alleged affairs and sex scandals. Even though there's a crisis in Iraq, all they can talk about is Clinton's sex life. Here we have Robin Cook having had an affair. He says he's in love and wants to marry her, whereas Clinton just seems to have been caught with his pants down. The thing is, over here, people are outraged with Cook and are saying that public funds have been misused. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but people aren't happy with him. Yet the Americans don't seem to care what Clinton does. His popularity rating has gone up to 70%. It's quite a different attitude. We'd be really concerned about it, but they see it differently.
Yes, who'd want to be a politician? Leaving yourself open to that sort of scrutiny? No, thank you. Later in the programme, Jack Ashley will talk about how he can influence government policy. But on a European level, how can we influence policies that are made in places like Brussels and Strasbourg? Can we, in fact, exert any power to influence the policies that are made? Well, in a minute, I'll be talking to Richard Howitt, MEP. See you later, Eva.
Hi, good to see you.
Can you explain the difference between your role and Jack's role?
Well, of course, Jack's in the House of Lords now, but like when he was an MP, as an MEP, I'm elected. I have a constituency, which is Essex in the east of England. And then from the elections, I represent all of my community, going over by aeroplane for normally about 3 days a week to either Brussels or to Strasbourg, where the European Parliament is, and to vote and take part in the debates on all the laws that are agreed in Europe. But like MPs at Westminster, I'm there to represent the views of the people who elect me and make sure the decisions are the right ones for them.
You frequently fly to Europe. How can you influence European policy?
Because if you've got a good argument and put it forward, you can actually win the day. And the classic example for deaf people was when Europe came forward with a proposal for European-wide driver's licences. And it was said that deaf people weren't as safe to drive as other people. So we told deaf people about that, and we argued against that, and we got that clause in the new law removed to say that deaf people were as safe or as unsafe to drive as anyone else. And whether it's about industry, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about protecting people's health, we as MEPs can speak out, we can propose changes to European laws, and we can vote on those laws. So we really can make a difference.
I always thought that EU directives were to be adhered to by all the member states, but it seems that there are discrepancies. How are these rules made, and should they be binding for all member states?
It depends which law or type of law we're talking about. So, for example, the right that we all have under the European Treaty to live or to work or to travel freely across the whole of Europe, that's a right in every single one of the member countries of the European Union. But there are other areas where Europe has only the power to recommend to the different countries that action is taken. And until recently, that included legislation on discrimination against disabled people, including discrimination against deaf people. And that's why we argued so hard for there to be a new non-discrimination clause in the new European Treaty, so that Europe could make binding compulsory laws for rights for deaf people. And of course, last year at Amsterdam, we were successful.
It's interesting that some of the issues do need cross-country agreement, but there's still a dislike of the single currency from the British point of view. Can I ask you, as someone who travels a lot, wouldn't it be easier not to have to exchange currencies each time we travel? Is our objection for sound financial reasons? Or is it just that we want to retain our own currency with our own Queen's head on our notes?
Well, not just me, you as well. Every time you go on holiday, you have to line up in the queue to exchange your money and then pay a big commission to the Bureau de Change before you get the foreign notes back. That's a problem for all of us, and in particular it's a problem for businesses who could have a lot less costs if they didn't have to exchange money all the time, and they could be much more certain when they're undertaking their imports and their exports. And of course that could mean more jobs for us here in Britain. So there are big benefits to be won from having a single currency. But at the moment we feel it's not the right time for Britain, and that's why the decision has been put off. And we do promise that there will be a referendum so that everyone will have a vote in whether we join or not. So no one has got anything to fear about the single currency.
What about this recent ban that the British government have introduced on the sale of beef on the bone?
It does sound mad, doesn't it? But what we know from 10 and 15 years ago is that Britain at that time had a very, very serious problem of mad cow disease. 170,000 cases of mad cows, and just a few hundred in France and in Belgium. And that's why there had to be strict rules brought in to deal with it, which I'm glad now are beginning to be successful. Just in the last week, we've launched a campaign called Try a Little Tenderness to restore public confidence in beef here in this country. And we're taking that message to Europe too. But we mustn't pretend that there wasn't a very real and serious problem in the past over our beef, and that 20 people have lost their lives by eating infected meat. And for all of us, obviously when we buy some meat or any food, we want to know that it's safe to eat, and that must be the first priority. And I don't apologise for that.
Now, a newspaper reported that 2 Labour MEPs have been expelled from the party. As an MEP, what's your relationship with the Labour Party?
Well, I'm a Labour person, I'm very proud of that. And with my colleagues, I worked very, very hard to get the Labour government elected in Britain. But those 2 MEPs, they chose to apply to a different political party to stand against the Labour Party in the future elections. And of course, you can't stand against a party and also be a member of that same party, so that's why they left. But as a Labour person, what I do is I do take Labour's philosophy and beliefs, the manifesto that we were elected on, and argue for that amongst our European colleagues. The difference is that we have 60 Labour MEPs as part of 220 socialist Euro MPs. And so we have to discuss with them. And then there's no single party in charge in the European Parliament. There are 9 different political parties. And therefore, we put our case as Labour representatives, but we have to come to a compromise agreement which is in the best interests of Britain and of Europe as a whole.
Now that Britain has taken over the presidency of the EU, does that mean that in future we have the power to introduce more effective changes for our country? Or is this just a PR exercise?
Well, what it means is that we're in the chair of the meetings. So we are the people who try and bring everyone else together and hammer out a final agreement to everyone's benefit. And each of the different countries in Europe take turns every 6 months to do that. It's a bit like a game of musical chairs. Of course, if you do that role intelligently, you can have much bigger influence over what those final decisions are. And our big hope during this 6 months is to have decisions which show people in Britain and across Europe that Europe is really working for them. Get rid of some of the bureaucracy and the inefficiency and concentrate on real questions that affect you and me, like jobs, like fighting crime, like having a better quality environment. And then all of us will have a much better understanding of what Europe is about and what it can achieve for us.
Thank you, Richard.
Hello.
Hello, nice to see you both again. Happy New Year, Jack, and to you, Jill. We're now going to take a look at welfare benefits, which is something that we've all come to take for granted. In fact, the original welfare state was established back in 1945 by the Labour government of that time. It was based on the principle that those people in the greatest need, such as people in real poverty, would be looked after. It was intended that they would no longer have to rely on charity, but they would have a right to have financial support. This system came to be the envy of the world, and since then we've all benefited. People's living standards have improved, and the state has looked after us in one form or another from the cradle to the grave. These days there are a whole host of benefits that can be applied for. It's currently estimated that approximately 3 out of 4 of all the households in the UK will be receiving some form of a welfare benefit, whether that be unemployment benefit, sickness benefit, child benefit, or some form of a benefit because of a person's disability, and that's just to mention a few. As a nation, we have come to rely on the welfare state and the existence of those benefits. But this dependency is now beginning to be challenged by our new Labour government. And the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has said that our welfare state needs to be modernised.
No one with a shred of compassion would say that we should not protect the vulnerable, but no one with a degree of common sense would say that the present system is perfect and should remain untouched. You elected me because you knew not just that the Labour Party had to change, had to modernise, but that the country had to change and modernise too.
The government's solution is to try to encourage people on benefits to get back into the workforce. But, of course, this is much easier said than done. And the first attempts to do this have been met with some stiff opposition.
Disabled demonstrators took their anger about threats to benefits to the top. Armed with placards and red paint, their message to Tony Blair was, "You can't get blood from a stone."
One of the most outspoken opponents of these new plans was Lord Ashley, when he spoke against the reforms, not in the Commons, but in the House of Lords. Let me ask you, Jack, why are you so strongly opposed to these measures?
I support welfare reform, and I believe it's very necessary because the system can and must be improved. But what I object to so strongly is the way in which the government is going about it, because ministers are considering substantial cuts in disability benefits, in the major disability benefits. Now, if, and I emphasise if, these cuts are made, they can devastate the lives of millions of severely disabled people, and that is totally unacceptable.
We help people who are genuinely in need, and no person who is disabled and in difficulty is going to go without proper help. Of course not.
Well, that's Tony Blair who said that people who are in genuine need are going to continue to receive their benefits. Do you think that's really going to be the case?
Well, that sounds fine, but it all depends on how Tony Blair defines those in need. You see, these specific benefits have been given for very clear reasons. Incapacity benefit for people who are unable to work. Disability living allowance for the extra costs of disability. Now, if we have some politicians coming in and saying we will define that differently and more narrowly, then they're adversely affecting the benefit system, in my view. Now, if Tony Blair would say, We don't intend to make any cuts in disability benefits, but we are going to reform the whole system. Fine. He would have warm support, but he's not said that. He's used the phrase that you use, and I think that is wrong.
Let me ask you then, Jack. We elected this government, and they had already stated quite clearly in their election manifesto that they intended to look into the welfare benefits system, and they were proposing some reforms. So we're panicking now, but they had already told us that they were going to do this.
Well, in the manifesto, there was some mention of reforms, and there's no doubt that it was very clear and categorical. What it was not clear and categorical about was the possibility of any major cuts in benefits. And that is why we are very concerned, because nothing was said in that manifesto about major cuts.
We've been talking here about the future implications of this review, but it's already happening, it's happening now, and members of the deaf community have started asking how it's going to affect them. So let me turn now to Joe, who is a disability advocate. Joe, can you give us any examples of what's happening out there with this review?
Well, at the moment, only a few deaf people will be affected because not many deaf people get the higher rates of both the care and mobility components of DLA. Most get either the middle or lower rates, but later on, next year or later this year, theirs will be reviewed. But at the moment, it's just those that get the higher rates which affects a lot of physically disabled people, people with learning difficulties or additional disabilities, leaving them worse off. To give you an example, there was one man who received 24-hour care, and suddenly his DLA was stopped without any explanation, after he had filled in a form. He had had this form to fill in, which he did, himself, not thinking anything of it, as he thought that his DLA would continue for life, whichever one thinks. So he completed the form, sent it off, and then received a letter saying that a decision had been made to stop his DLA, not even a reduction, they withdrew it completely, which meant that he was unable to pay his carers and had to go into a care home, and his carers ended up out of work. I thought that the Labour government was trying to encourage people into work, and yet these carers find themselves out of work. That's what worries me.
It seems there was another example of a man who was shrewd enough to take out an insurance plan which would have meant that he had cover in the event of redundancy or any sickness. Then, as it turned out, he actually was made redundant, and of course his insurance company paid out, but then he wasn't entitled to benefits. Makes you think, what's the point of covering yourself?
It's a catch-22 situation. That person was wise enough to take out insurance. But at the end of the day, many people find that what happens is they can't get benefit because they are seen to have sufficient income, which means they don't need benefit. So there is a problem there.
As you know, there are people in genuine need of benefits, but there are also people who are better off, who can receive benefits that they don't actually need. Shouldn't we be focusing on them rather than the less well off?
Well, if the government wants to take money off these people, what they should do is increase income tax at the top level. But ministers have said they're not prepared to do that. They've said there'll be no income tax increases for 2 years. So in a sense, they've painted themselves in a corner. But if, for example, with benefits like child benefit, they want to take money there, what I believe they should do is to have the top taxpayers have their child benefit taxed, but leave it alone for the people on the low rate of tax. I believe that would be one of the fair ways of proceeding.
There are a lot of people who are concerned about pensions when we're talking about benefits, and they're wondering whether they're actually going to be worse off when they retire. Is there really going to be enough money for everybody's old age pensions? What do you think about this situation?
I think that the government will find it very difficult to cut pensions in any way, because if people have paid their contributions over 20, 30, 40 years, I don't think the government can then say, well, mate, we're sorry, you've paid your contributions, but we are now going to trim and cut your pension. I don't think that's really a possibility. So I don't see how the government can play this. I'm quite certain that they will not find it easy at all to cut pensions, and I hope that that's not what they're thinking of.
There's been outrage about the fact that the government are proposing these changes without consulting organisations representing disabled people, expectant mothers, children. They're just going ahead with these plans. How can they know if people are receiving too much money in benefits? I think people are really suspicious of their motives.
Yes, there have been complaints about lack of consultation. Ministers say they have consulted some organisations, but others are complaining. Now, I asked Tony Blair if he would publish the review document of the issues being discussed by ministers now. And Tony Blair said, no, I will not publish it because we should be publishing a green paper later on. And then you can discuss, everyone can discuss the proposals. I think that is wrong. I think there should be more consultation about the actual review document now, so that everyone knows what is actually being discussed. Because what this means at present is that ministers know what they are looking at, but we campaign in the dark. And that is why the government should publish all the documentation so that we can play our role in it as well.
We've been talking here about the implications as regard benefits, but I think there's another area that this could relate to too. There's access to work, the PACT scheme. Oh, hi there.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to stop there. It seems that the government's announcement to change the benefits system is a contentious issue. We'll keep you informed of the government's decisions. That's all for this month. See you next month. Bye.
Bye then. See you next time.